Welcome back to the ugly side of gardening. This is take 2, where we're going to be talking about what is going on around me. You've worked really hard on your garden, you've selected the right plants, you've selected the right place to grow them, and you've made sure they have all the nutrients that they need, and what happens? An abundance of overgrowth. Now this can be slightly overwhelming because you end up with vivacious vines, 2 tall trees, and that abundance of overgrowth. So what do? You prune. Now if you're like me, pruning seemed like it would be just an easy peasy kind of thing, right? But there's actually a lot more to it, and we're going to talk about that now. If you'd like to learn more about how to grow, how to prepare food, and to enjoy a healthy living, hit subscribe now. So with pruning comes tools, and tool selection is actually surprisingly important. I have found out in my gardening years that you can never have too many shears. So you want to have ones like this that are super fine. These are perfect for trimming herbs or anything that has a delicate thin stem. I find that these are going to cut a very nice clean cut if you keep them well maintained. Next up in the repertoire is this guy, and this is actually my go-to pair of shears for most of my gardening needs. So when I'm cutting okra, which has a thicker stem, or any plant like that, I'm going to choose these. Now this is a recent addition to my tool selection because I never really found one that was this small yet not super fine. So if you can find these, I highly suggest getting one, and I will try to put links and all the things I'm talking about in the description below. This pair of shears is probably the most common. It's the workhorse shears. It's the largest of the hand shears for your everyday pruning. You can use this for pruning small limbs on trees, those vines that we were talking about earlier. These guys are going to do a good job of cutting through pretty much anything. But sometimes you need Cindy, the lopper. I'd like to take credit of that joke, but I think my dad actually first named the first Cindy. And these are just loppers. And what they're good for is because they have a wider range of the handle, you can get more torque when cutting. So the way the blades are, you have the main cutting blade and then this thicker base blade. And so the way it can hook around the limb that you're trying to cut, and then you just chop it right off. So now that we've selected the proper tools, we need to take care of those tools. And the 2 things you want to focus on is cleaning and sharpening. A sharp tool is going to make a nice clean cut, which is incredibly important for the health of your plants. If you have a clean cut, you're less likely to get disease and pests to attack that cut. If you have a ragged and jagged cut, then all sorts of things can happen there and cause you lots of problems in the long term. Another thing you want to do is to make sure that you clean your tools. You want to have a designated cloth or one that's easily resanitizable, and you want to use rubbing alcohol or a neutral spirit like vodka, our friend vodka from the last film, and very carefully wipe down your blades. Now the reason why you want to do this, particularly if you've trimmed a diseased plant, is you want to make sure you get any of those diseases, those pests, those microorganisms that are now on your blade off of your blade so that you won't infect a healthy plant. Remember those vivacious vines I was talking about? Well, this is my inspiration. This is actually our bleeding heart vine, and it has decided that it wants to take over the path that I am standing on right now, believe it or not. So they need to be trimmed. I have chosen my moderate sized clipper, my favorite clipper as I talked about, to demonstrate how to properly trim a plant. So you're going to want to focus on the stem that you're going to trim, and you're going to look at its diameter. So this one is rather thin, but it is a very sturdy vine. So my little tiny thin shears might have not cut it. Get it? Haha, cut it? Haha. Anyway, so we're going to start here where the leaves have split off from the main stem, and we're going to cut just above that roughly a half of what the diameter of my main stem is. I'm also going to want to cut at an angle away from that bud of the leaves. And the reason why you're going to cut at an angle is to avoid any water collection in your cut area. If you cut it just straight, it's likely that moisture from dew or from rain is going to puddle there, and that may cause mold. Ta-da! So that's all you have to do. I have a nice angled cut now. It's slanted away so that any moisture is going to drain off of the plant and back onto the ground. And I'm not going to interfere with the bud growth at the base here where I cut, and not have too much excess stem where the plant would be sending unnecessary energy. Now obviously I cut this too far out. I need to cut it way back farther so that it's still not in the trail, but I wanted to do this where you could see easily to see what I was doing. Now if you waited far too long like I have to start your pruning project, you may feel a little guilty of just throwing these away. I have 2 suggestions for you that you might find helpful that'll ease the pain just a little bit. Number 1, if you have a healthy plant that you've cut, you can simply add that to your compost, and that way all the energy that was created to create what you trimmed can then go back into the earth to save and help enrich the soil for your other plants. Another thing is that many varieties like this one will easily create a new plant from cuttings. Simply make sure that you have a freshly trimmed plant, add some root hormone, and put it into a nice moist potting mixture, and you might have plant number 2. So I've scooted slightly over to my left here next to some of our mulberry trees. And as you can see, they have grown way above where I could reach to harvest. Trees like this you want to top so that way it keeps harvests easier. Now mulberries are another plant that will easily regrow from a trimming. And basically the way I choose where to trim my mulberries is I reach up. And when I can't reach anymore, I'm going to find the node just below that, and that's where I'm going to trim. So now all this, I can strip the lower leaves off and repot this if I choose. We have lots of mulberries, so I'm probably just going to compost it. And this would quite eagerly grow a new mulberry tree. Another method on how to choose where to prune is to increase air circulation. As you can see here, we're in front of our lime bush, and it has a rather dense and compact growth habit. So if I trim some of the interior branches, that's going to increase airflow, reducing risks of pests and mold. And it's also going to create more light penetration deeper into the bush, which will increase the yield. My final tip on pruning is when you find branches that cross each other and they start to rub and create friction, you want to make sure that you trim one of those branches so that way you don't have that constant friction. Friction places on trees and bushes is a prime target for any disease, mold, and pest attacks. That's all the tips I have for you today on pruning. Thank you to these people over here. They're our VIPs, and they help support this channel. If you'd like to be a VIP, check out the links below. And if you enjoyed this video, look up. There's another one you might like equally as well.